GLF's Brave New Day. With over 2.7 million views, we'd like to thank all our viewers and collaborators for their support. As we lead into our GLF's Brave New World has impacted your worldview. teamworkarts.com or via WhatsApp on +91 989 07 by the end of the weekend. Those of you who missed our earlier sessions, a secret Maraju, or all the other sessions featuring Peak Wire, Jacobson, Margaret Atwood, Oran Pamuk, Devdutt Patnaik, Marcus Mensch, Edmund de Waal, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. You can watch these or on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Lit. Our next session is presented in collaboration with Imprint Houston, who are, of course, our partners for JLF Houston. An exploration into an alternative history in lost the Falklands War, the internet, social media, and automated cars already exist, and the father of modern computer science, Alan Turing, is still alive. Here in conversation with Marcus du Sautoy, McEwan discusses his latest novel and asks whether a robot can understand human emotions or whether we humans lack understanding. Ian McEwan is the critically acclaimed author of 17 books. His first published work is a collection of short stories, First Love, Last Rites. Won the Summer The Child in Time, which won the 1987 Whitebread Novel of the Year. The Cement Garden, Enduring Love, Amsterdam, which won the 1990 Booker Prize. Atonements, Saturday, On Chesil Beach, Solar, Sweet Tooth, The Children's Act, and Nutshell, which was a #1 bestseller. Atonement, Enduring Love, The Children's Act, and On Chesil Beach have all been adapted for the big screen. Marcus du Sautoy is the Simoini Professor for the Public Understanding of Science and Professor of Mathematics at the University of Oxford. He is the author of 6 books, including the recent The Creativity Code. Please do remember to comment and ask questions by typing it into the comment section below. And in case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. And of course, if we drop off, just hang in there and we'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, Ian McEwan, Machines Like Me, in conversation with Marcus du Sautoy.
Hello, it's great to welcome everyone from around the world to this session, and such an honor to spend the afternoon here in England, as we both are with Ian McEwan. Some viewers may be perhaps surprised by the fact that we've put a novelist and a scientist together, but anyone who knows Ian's work will know that Ian loves science, and there's always a little bit of science and sometimes a lot of science in the case of this new book bubbling away through his work. So Ian, I was interested to know, first of all, what draws you to science as a subject in your novels?
Well, right from my early teens, I was a passionate reader of books of science for laymen, or for lay boys, as they were. The English educational system has always had this problem that it asks you at the age of 16 to make that big fatal choice, humanities or sciences. I was very, very torn. The English teacher happened to be rather more attractive figure, and I went with him, but always with a sort of backward look, Marcus, over my shoulder at another life. And I've now enjoyed this life vicariously because my son William runs his own group in Cambridge. He's a very advanced virologist, in fact, been able to give us a bit of advice on
very relevant
pandemic. But yes, it's now just part of my mental furniture, I guess. I learned to think scientifically, which is not really in terms of test tubes, but just a kind of orientation in life, really.
And I'm a mathematician, and I think mathematics is one of the subjects you did manage to push a little bit further during your sort of senior years at school. That you had a teacher that encouraged all of these humanities students to actually try out a bit of mathematical thinking. Is that right?
He was marvelous. He burst into the English class and said, listen, I'll get you liberal arts know-nothings through maths A level. Who wants to do it? So we all put up our hands. And he just, when he got us together, he said, okay, we're going to go the speed of the slowest ship. Anyone who doesn't get it, just speak up. And so we inched our way forward. And it's given me a lifelong respect, Marcus, for your field, because I learned right from the building blocks upwards, the calculus. And I have to say that I got it, I understood it, and I began to use it. But intellectually, I'd say it's the hardest thing I ever did. Nothing in an English degree, history, French, ever required so much attention. And there were certain points during the lessons where I thought, if I sneeze, it's all going to be gone. So it's given me a massive respect for people who can understand mathematics at its leading edges.
So some of the scientific subjects that you've been interested in, evolutionary biology, one of them, climate change, of course, but in this new novel, you're interested in something perhaps closer to my world, artificial intelligence, which certainly involves a lot of mathematics in it. And it's interesting, you open with a book saying, artificial humans were a cliche long before they arrived. So when they did, they seemed to be something of a disappointment. The imagination, fleeter than history, than technological advance, has already rehearsed this future in books. I was interested, why now for you this book about artificial intelligence? What's important about this particular moment that you felt, yes, this is a moment I want to rehearse my own thoughts on this technology?
Well, I've been living with this for many years, Marcus. I started out in the late 70s. I wrote a television film, a drama set loosely around Bletchley. And although I didn't really stick with Turing, I read a lot of his early papers in Mind from 1935. And in fact, it was called The Imitation Game long before the movie came along with the same name. And ever since then, I've been interested in AI. And all through the 70s and 80s, it just seemed to be one long disappointment. It never measured up. We slowly learned just how difficult the easiest things we do are. And then I would say in the last 10 or 12 years, things started to move on, and it started to invade our lives at all kinds of levels. But still the ancient dream, the golem, that figure in Jason and the Argonauts, 30 foot high, who throws rocks at Jason's ship, that's still a little just out of reach. And that's that element of disappointment. We see it in movies, robots that are indistinguishable from humans. But it's a long way ahead of us yet. We see creatures on television from their waist upwards, they're plugged into the mains. For heaven's sake, we don't even have a battery. That's, so at the same time, it seems to have suddenly come into our lives in a major way. And even though we're a long way yet from my kind of totally humanoid robot, I thought now's the time to start thinking of what it would be like to live close up with an artificial mind, and whether we ever know if it has consciousness.
Of course, the big question that Turing was asking with his test, when should we regard this thing as having rights? And of course, I think that's partly what you're exploring in the book. Maybe it'd be nice for viewers to actually hear a little bit of the opening of the book and hear about your actual piece of artificial intelligence that you've conjured up for this wonderful novel.
Yes, sure. Here we go. 12 of this first edition were called Adam, 13 were called Eve. Corny, everyone agreed, but commercial. Notions of biological race being scientifically discredited, the 25 were designed to cover a range of ethnicities. There were rumors and then complaints that the Arab could not be told apart from the Jew. Random programming, as well as life experience, would grant to all complete latitude in sexual preference. By the end of the first week, all of the Eves sold out. At a careless glance, I might have taken my Adam for a Turk or a Greek. He weighed 170 pounds, so I had to ask my upstairs neighbour, Miranda, to help me carry him in from the street on the disposable stretcher that came with the purchase. Now, Adam was not a sex toy. However, he was capable of sex and possessed functional mucous membranes, in the maintenance of which he consumed half a litre of water each day. While he sat at the table, I observed that he was uncircumcised, fairly well endowed, with copious dark pubic hair. This highly advanced model of artificial human was likely to reflect the appetites of its young creators of code. The Adams and Eves, it was thought, would be lively.
Now, I was quite struck when I read the novel that you chose to make your artificial intelligence very human. I mean, you really went for something that is trying to replicate, it has sexual organs, it can have sex, as it does at one point during the novel. Why did you do that as opposed to perhaps an intelligence which perhaps isn't embodied and maybe very different?
Well, I think that we have before us a fascinating problem that when we achieve this ancient dream, when we achieve this
your artificial intelligence interrupting you there, I can see.
I know.
It's obviously got something to say.
Yeah, like it's raining outside or something. I don't know. But we've got ahead of us this extraordinary problem that when we do fulfill this ancient dream of making ourselves, as it were, we're then going to be looking into a mirror. What are the outer limits? Where are the boundaries between what's human and what's machine? Will we make artificial people, even nicer than us, or nicer than us, rather than we have dark fantasies of these creatures that we might make, but we know how to be good. We have all our philosophies, all our religions tell us how to be good, but we have extraordinary difficulty being good all the time. What if we gather all our priests and shamans and moral philosophers together and set about some reasonable human ethical codes and put them into an artificial human who will live by them consistently in ways that we find, with our self-interest, self-delusion, self-preferences, all the kinds of little cognitive flaws that Danny Kahneman has listed for us. What if we have someone not like that? So I really wanted someone absolutely human-like in order to explore these boundaries of interest and difficulty, possibly even tragedy that lie ahead of us. Because as we've often said to ourselves, we might deal ourselves out of the game. We might make a creature that would then help to make the next generation of creatures, and we would be lost in the process and slowly become, through our inadequacies, rather irrelevant.
Yes, there's one paragraph that I thought was incredibly haunting, which was exactly saying that. I mean, that, this may be our last Copernican act of,
yes.
So showing us that the universe, we're not at the center of it all. In fact, we're about to make something that will put us obsolete and just out of the center of things. That was quite a frightening sort of paragraph.
We have successively displaced ourselves, as you say. And our last redoubt is, at least we think we're the cleverest people on the planet. And then we might just discover we're the second cleverest.
Yes. Yeah. Now, it's interesting you say about, that we hopefully will make these things better versions of ourselves, that they will have the moral code to be able to make good decisions, because in some sense, that's at the heart of this book, isn't it? This kind of, one doesn't want to give away too much to allow people to read the story for themselves, but there is a moral dilemma that the humans and the machine face, and they make different decisions.
Yes, I mean, at the heart of this, as you say, is a moral dilemma. It's about revenge. And for most readers, this revenge seems immensely just. A man who have committed a great wrong is somehow entrapped and punished in ways that he wouldn't be. The law would never catch up with him. And most readers, and I have set this, I mean, I primed this, as it were, I've set it up in such a way as to make it a difficult issue. But the human response, I think, is a warm one and says, well, that bad man got his deserts and he went to prison, even if we had to sort of jiggle the rules a bit. But Adam takes a very different view. He says you cannot run a society on the basis of revenge. The rule of law must prevail. And you, pointing to one of the principal characters, must go to prison because you lied in court, you lied to the police, you gave false witness, and you sent a man innocent as tried to jail. So this is one of the sort of parting moments of whether we would make a creature more moral than us and then suddenly find, in fact, that their moral precepts can be rather cold and ruthless, and we might suffer from it.
Yes,
so, yes,
I mean, there's also the dilemma of machines just following through rules to their, logical conclusion, and sometimes, in some ways, he's following what morally should be correct there, but sometimes there may be unintended consequences of our set of axioms. We create a machine to harvest carbon, and then the machine realizes, oh, all of these humans are made of carbon. I will harvest them too. I mean, this is one of the fears about just not having the larger context somehow. I suppose that's one of the challenges of AI at the moment. It's kind of narrow rather than this general AI. AI hopefully will have that greater context, but sometimes, and in some ways, that's the fault of Adam, is that he hasn't got the greater context of the personal story behind these two characters in your story.
Absolutely. I mean, you cite one example. The other one is you say to the machine, cure cancer. Well, the easiest way to cure cancer is to just eliminate the entire human race and all life on Earth. We hope that machine learning will get us around this. And actually, I was playing around with Google's Translate, and I noticed that this is a massive machine of group input and machine learning of quite an extraordinary kind. Whether we can fit this all into, I think one of the great things about AI, Marcus, is it's shown us what a piece of work is a man, and a woman for that matter. We have just over a litre of slushy stuff. It has, let's say 100 billion connections. It doesn't overheat, liquid cooled. It is a most extraordinary machine. We're nowhere near such a thing. We would require air conditioning machines on an extraordinary scale to run a similar machine. So yes, in my lifetime, it won't happen. I won't meet my Adam. I certainly would love to. I would love to explore this boundary, because I think that an artificial human will be like a giant mirror into which we peer and find out what are the edges of being human. And given that the novel's, I think, central task is to explore what we are, how we are in time, in conditions of modernity, etc. Having this mirror in front of us will be, I think, an advance in self-knowledge. I think it will teach us things that...
which of course was Turing's original goal in a way, wasn't it? It wasn't so much about creating a computer with intelligence. It was exploring what makes us intelligent, and trying to simulate that will help us to understand ourselves much better. So I think you will probably very much enjoy the book.
He provided us a great way out about whether the machine could be conscious by just saying, well, if you can't tell the difference, you may as well assume it is, for all intents and purposes. Which I think at the sort of functional behavioral level, that's fine. But the philosophical in us will always want to say, can this machine that we made actually feel? Does it feel pain? Even as it says, of course I do, and how dare you insult me with that question.
Yes, of course it will. It will say all the things it needs to say in order to try and convince us. I mean, that's what's so. I mean, of course, I may be an avatar. I may be outside enjoying a G&T in the back garden, and I've just sent a very good simulation of myself. But at what point will viewers realise that they're being talked to by perhaps two artificial intelligences, which have just been conjured up on Zoom for us? So
yes, well, cheers. It's a jolly nice gin and tonic.
I mean, one of the things that I also felt this was a moment to write a book about artificial intelligence. My book is a non-fiction book about
Yes.
Whether artificial intelligence can do something which we thought was very uniquely human, which is creativity. We felt that was perhaps the only thing that we left as a job, is being a novelist and a mathematician, which I regard as a creative act. And in the book, I kind of speculate that creativity was probably our greatest tool for actually testing this inner world that we each have, and sort of sharing whether our inner world is anything like yours, trying to give you new insights. And there's a very interesting moment in the book when sort of Adam is talking about literature, and he says, but when the marriage of men and women to machines is complete, this literature will be redundant because we'll understand each other too well.
Yes.
Very interesting comment. Somehow that
Now,
the novel is all about this problem.
I should make it clear that this is Adam's view, not mine. But he's really speculating in a kind of adolescence of his intellectual life, that we might start having implants in our brains. First stage might be to connect us to the internet, and then via the internet to each other. And then we will have full access to each other's minds. Now, the novel, I think, has basically lived well off human misunderstanding and human wrongdoing and human cognitive defects of all kinds. So Adam's view is, if we could read each other's minds well enough, there would be no place for the novel. All the friction, all the tension would be gone. All that would be left for the novel would either be lyric poetry that celebrates the act of love and falling in love, or just the haiku that goes in pursuit.
But Adam loves creating.
Moment. Yeah. It's a rather extravagant theory. I got a strong feeling that human civilization is going to go on being a fantastic mess, and that novelists are going to be gainfully employed for many millennia yet.
It's interesting that this is one of Elon Musk's dreams as well. I mean, he's got a new company developing the idea of Neuralink, which he believes will be an implant that will be able to share our inner states. But that seems to me to completely misunderstand kind of the word games we play. When I say I'm sad, the whole point is that we then try and generate literature, music, poetry to try and link up. Well, what does that mean? If I'm in pain, is that anything like your pain? So it seems like this is, you almost at the heart of the hard problem of consciousness is the fact that you'll never be able to achieve what Adam is kind of claiming there.
You could take another view, Marcus, that if we could read each other's mind, that no marriage would last longer than a week.
Yes, I agree. I think my marriage
we could be at each other's throats.
Mystery. Yeah.
We could be at each other's throats all the time because we can read each other's minds. And we might have even more novels. So that's why I say that I dissociate myself a little from Adam's view.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But he wants to write haikus because he's fallen in love himself.
Now, it's interesting that he is a creative AI, because he is writing poetry, and actually in my book I sort of examine visual art, music, and literature, and surprisingly, I found that literature was the one that current AI, machine learning, is having great difficulty, mostly because it doesn't have context of what a word means through history, through society, through culture. Yeah. But the one place where it does seem to be quite successful is poetry. And in fact, Turing, one of the early things he did with a machine up in Manchester that he made after Bletchley Park was one of his team created a little algorithm which churned out love letters based on a random number generator that Turing had developed. But it's interesting that, poetry, because it's quite gnomic in nature, that we we bring a lot of our own creativity as a reader to a piece of poetry, which means I think AI can get away with a little bit more. Was that the reason you felt that maybe Adam would be successful at poetry, or choosing the haiku as a very kind of mathematical form?
Well, the haiku is such a limited form and does not get involved in human complexity, ambivalence, and ambiguity. And I agree with you entirely. I mean, language is an open system, unlike, say, chess, which is a perfectly closed system. And open systems, I think, are very difficult for machines as things stand. And every word, as you say, every sentence, every phrase can be read in all kinds of ways. And yet we know which way is the correct way, often because we're reading context, body language, tone of voice, and 1,000 other things. All the warmth, as it were, of human interchange shapes how we understand language. So a good test, I think, of whether we've made a conscious machine is whether it could write even a bad novel.
Yes.
Let alone a good one. If it could write a great novel, I think we might as well go the Turing route and say, okay, hands up, we surrender. We have to treat you as conscious. If you can out Tolstoy, or out Flaubert, then we might as well just accept that functionally you're conscious.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting when will Jaipur have a piece of AI presenting its novel at a festival? But but one of the things I found that AI was having a lot of difficulty with was this idea of time. It can generate things which locally make some sense, like perhaps a passage of text. In fact, 350 words of my book was written by AI, and my editor couldn't even find which it was, which was slightly depressing, because I thought it was totally obvious. But this idea of something having a sustained narrative, also in music as well, that AI is very good at creating music which makes sense locally but just goes nowhere, is boring ultimately. So I think the challenge of a novel will be really big for a piece of AI.
I mean, I noticed that a lot of the music you hear is AI generated, and you touch on this in your book. Much better if it's the early 18th century than the early 20th century. Much harder to do Richard Strauss than to do a kind of cod piece of Bach. But I mean, beyond all this, Marcus, there's a much stronger, maybe a much more sinister element to AI that we're already seeing in terms of the power of the state in surveillance, in face recognition, in the fact that so much military research now is for machines to be taking decisions. Already we're beginning to drive cars. I've got one myself that could start to make moral decisions for me.
Right.
I noticed that moral philosophers are now sitting down with automobile manufacturers. There could be a split second when you have to decide between slamming your car into a truck head on or killing 5 children on a pavement.
It's philosophy 101, isn't it? I mean, exactly. It's,
so do you want a car that's going to say, well, sorry, mate, you're going to have to go? Because I see Nature published a very interesting worldwide survey of people's attitudes of who are the most valuable human beings. And the European American group said almost universally children. The Chinese took a different view. The most valuable pedestrian is an old person. Now I'm 72. I'm rather coming around.
Exactly. Well, we've done a lot of work to get where we are. It's Now we're going to get some questions coming in from the audience, but there's one question I did want to ask, which is about the decision to actually stage this novel in the past rather than in the future. I mean, that's a very interesting one. It's the novel takes place in the 1980s. It's a slightly alternative England where we've lost the Falklands War. So what was your decision about, something which is looking into the future to be set in the past?
Well, it really was a game I wanted to play with contingency, that we take for granted where we are in science, in technology, in social development, whatever it is, as a given. And yet at the same time, we cannot guess the very futures that we make. So how easily, for example, the discovery of the microscope might have revolutionized medicine as far back as the mid-17th century. But in fact, medicine held out against the microscope and a germ theory of disease till the late 19th century, amazingly. And it often struck me how easily we could have had electricity in the 2nd century BC. We could have been sending fax in the 14th century. So much contingency and chance, and how close you lived to where coal was, or where the Industrial Revolution. Who would have guessed it would start in the Midlands in the middle of the 18th century? So I thought, well, I'm just going to throw all this up in the air and make just slight changes. I mean, how easily we could not be leaving Europe, how easily America could have a different president if the Russians had not used a bit of AI to get involved. Yeah. We can ask these questions, and yet, as our future unrolls, we are so hopeless at guessing where we're going. We're already you and I, wondering about the future with AI. We're almost certainly to be wrong. I mean,
yes. Well, I think in some ways, the novel is quite an interesting exploration of chaos theory. The fact that we set up a particular situation, but it requires a very small perturbation to send a system, in a political system, in a very different direction.
Exactly so. We could have so easily lost the Falklands War had the Argentinians got the French over to help them prime their missiles correctly. The social effects on us, politically, socially, would be enormous, as they would be for the Argentinians, because the Falklands War, let us remember, led to the fall of a fascist junta. So all of these things, there's a wonderful story by Borges, The Garden of the Forking Paths. And you go down one path, and in fact, we see it. Physicists talk about this too. Schrödinger's cat. One set of equations, as it were, collapses, and we go down this path. Where are the others, the rest of us, going down the other path? And I suppose the novel is always just choosing these imaginary paths for readers. So although it was a sort of subtext of the novel, I just could not stop myself, once I got going on this, having fun with it. The idea that the Beatles get back together, that John Lennon is not shot, and then they produce their worst album ever.
And also having Alan Turing still alive is
well, that was the most crucial.
I would love to be living in that alternative universe. But.
Yeah, he becomes a gay icon, and I give him the life that I wanted him to have had. Immensely influential, a kind of rock star among scientists, a bit like Stephen Hawking. With a great beneficial effect, but also helping to advance the computer revolution into the early 80s instead of
solving NP versus P. I mean, that's we're all still waiting for that one to happen. So.
You can collect your $1 million if you can. So exactly. We're counting on you, Marcus. Actually.
Now, we got some wonderful questions coming in already from viewers. So I'm very keen to send some of these your way. So I've got Nikita is asking, would you create a parallel between Adam's creation in the novel with his personality, etc., and your process of creating characters for your books?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I sort of rather put myself through this, that I didn't quite know where I was going to take this. And I thought, I know what, I'll just have this machine delivered at home, and I'll let my main character and his the young woman that he's about to fall in love with unpack it for us, and then I'll just see what would happen. And in fact, between them, they're under the illusion that they can create Adam's character for him. That's what it says in the book. And in that sense, they're rather like parents who believe that they can shape the personality of their children, largely disproved by cognitive psychology. So yes, I let Adam unfold, pretending to myself that I could shape his character, but actually I just let him do some machine learning, as it were, on his own. And he became his own man, quite separate from me. So yes.
And is that something you feel often with your characters, that
Yep.
that you set up, they are a bit like your children, which then become something distinct from where they started?
Well, they prove absolutely, if it works out, that they're not your children. There are many scenes in which I have characters going into a room. I know what I want out of it, but I don't know how to get there. So I think to myself, well, I'll just get them together and let's see what happens. So Adam very much was an evolving process, and I thought I'll just let him build. Find out
mirrors exactly what happens. So Aaron is asking, human brains created machines. Do you think they will take over the humans, or they will still be under the control of humans? So the singularity, are we going to hit the singularity, or?
Well, I only can answer that question, and it tells me my mood state. In my most optimistic states of mind, I feel that somehow we will remain in control of this, because we have too much to lose by it. But on my darker side thinks that the singularity is absolutely inevitable. We will sooner or later become savages, primitive creatures among a new race of men and women that we do not fully understand. They'll have better memories than us. Maybe they'll be better judges and bank managers, and it's the white collar jobs that and the novelists and even the mathematicians that will be going. So whether we then just become like children in a play group,
my fear is we're more like animals in a zoo, that they're going to come and say that's what we evolved from. And
I see the Oxford professor of future studies was suggesting that once we get through quantum computing, the optimum size for a humanoid would be about 3 millimeters. And such a creature would live very lightly on the earth, whereas us, 180-pound creatures are ruinous.
Very interesting. Yeah.
So, you might come back to Earth, Marcus, in, let's say, 100,000 years' time and say, where is everybody? And then you look down at your feet.
Very interesting. Yeah. Now, one of the things I was encouraged by when I wrote my book about AI and creativity is that getting an AI to learn on the stories that we've told actually creates a much more empathetic AI that understands how we think. And actually, I always quote during talks I give something that you said about 9/11, that the hijackers, if they could have got in the minds of their passengers, never would have done what they did. So do you think that is perhaps our hope? Our literature, machine learning on our literature might create an empathetic AI?
Well, that's interesting, because you can draw from that a parallel between machines and humans, because there's some very good, solid evidence, and I mean in the sort of scientific sense, that people who read extensively in literature are much better at reading other people. Now, whether this is an association or a cause, I've no idea, but people who rehearse, as it were, social situations by reading novels constantly tend to be much more finely graded in their understanding and responses and their powers of empathy with others. So Adam spends all his time when he's charging up in the middle of the night reading all of world literature, and he knows his Shakespeare 1,000 times better than my principal character.
Yeah.
And from it, he does indeed learn a greater range of responses. So this would be the route, I suppose, Marcus, by which an artificial being could write that novel, having read all the novels, having met other people and lived through social situations. The one limiting factor is mortality, because one of the great shapers of literature is an awareness of our own death.
Yeah, it's when this thing here suddenly realizes that it's going to be obsolete in it's an iPhone 10 and there's an iPhone 11. So is it going to have an existential kind of feeling about itself?
Well, precisely. It's a good analogy because you could just download everything's on your 10 into your 11. Yes. We don't have that luxury. So Adam feels very sad that he knows that he will never die, that at the moment in which his material body is crushed, as indeed it is in the novel, he can be uploaded and everything, all his experiences can be just be placed in another machine. We will never have that. Well, I don't believe in an afterlife. I know that many do, but I don't think there's much chance of us ever having a moment of upload. So perhaps by reading our laments, by reading Larkin's Obard and etc., about our fear and astonishment that we will cease to exist, how that affects our poetry and our literature, perhaps machines could begin to at least understand us in terms of that savage limit we have on consciousness.
Vidya has just written a question about, after reading your book, I was curious to know that if we lived forever, would we end up committing suicide at some point? All these robots had a physical lifespan of 20 years, but many others only lasted a few years before destroying themselves. I mean, it was interesting you made that decision. I think I rather liked it because the only reason Adam actually carries on is because of a love of mathematics and I can't remember what the other two things were, but
love itself, Marcus. He's
mathematics,
in love.
Poetry and love, of course.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So that's what keeps him going, whilst the others all kind of close themselves down early.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it'd be food and wine, but there we go. Well, what I speculated was that these creatures would come into the world with a fairly rational expectation of human life, given that they are products of its science. And then they see the most extraordinary human suffering, unnecessary, easily relievable human suffering. Children dying of curable diseases, climate change advancing on us. We know precisely what to do, but we don't do it, and so on. That they despair. Women treated in a certain way in certain societies that are sort of fantastically limiting of their choices and consciousness. Racism, genocide, they just cannot bear it anymore. They cannot bear the human contradictions of their rationality on the one hand and the savagery and suffering that they inflict on each other. And so they give up. They disable their kill switches, but sooner or later they want to press them themselves.
And Adam's last haiku, I think, or a poem, is "Machines like me and people like you and our future together, the sadness that's to come." But unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. What a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. And great questions. There were still more questions coming in, so I think we could have kept going for much longer. But unfortunately, we have to switch our off button and back to Sanjoy.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ian McEwan. Thank you so much, Marcus du Sautoy. And Marcus, I don't know whether you know, but the year that you came, last time you came to the Jaipur Literature Festival, we were actually trying to get an AI from Hong Kong to come and be on the panel with you and have that AI talk about, world geopolitics of some sort, and have that as a conversation between you, me, and the AI. But unfortunately, it was going to cost us $50,000. So we couldn't. So we decided against getting it because it was
in a few years' time, it'll just be a $5 or something. So yeah.
Feed you, or should we get the AI? I think feeding you all was a much better idea. But I think the big issue in all of this is that, as Ian said, will we make the AIs the reflection of our bad or our dark side, as in every James Bond movie, or as you all have said, would we make them empathetic and good? Well, it's normally the dark side that seems to, at least these days, succeed. But thank you both. And I'm really sorry to all our audiences who sent in loads of questions and the most fascinating conversations. So sorry we couldn't take those questions. And Thank you to our radio partners, Red FM, Bajate Raho. And please do remember to log on tomorrow for our next round of fabulous sessions, Saturday, the 25th of July. We start with China and the world, Rana Mitter in conversation with William Dalrymple. For 70 years, India has tended to look at Pakistan as its main strategic rival and potential enemy. But recent events in Hong Kong and Xinjiang and the line of control in Ladakh have given many pause for thought. Have our strategic thinkers been looking in the wrong direction? Professor of History and Politics of Modern China at Oxford University, Rana Mitter cuts through the mythology and separates truth from fiction in conversation with William Dalrymple. And this will be at 7 p.m. Indian Standard Time, 2:30 p.m. British Summer Time, and 9:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The second session on Saturday, the 25th of July, will be Textiles, the Fabric of Memory. Ritu Kumar, Himanshu Vardhan in conversation with Supriya Dravid, a session evoking textile narratives, the stories they tell and the memories they hold, with celebrated designer Ritu Kumar and managing director of Etsy India, Himanshu Vardhan, in conversation with Supriya Dravid, editor of Elle India. And this will be at 8:30 p.m. IST, 4 p.m. British Summer Time, and 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Till then, stay safe, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time.